Carol,
Right.
hi, how are you?
I'm wonderful, and you look beautiful. What a great big smile you've got.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, that's in part for the blessing that you've bestowed upon me with your wonderful company.
Oh, thank you, dear. Thank you.
Honestly, when I got your email, it was just so friendly and accommodating. I was just like, and I just spoke to my wife and said about us bringing the appointment forward. And she said, well, how amazing that you're going to get to speak to this beautiful human being
Oh,
who,
so
you're
hard.
kind of like an international treasure is how I describe you to people. You're globally, we all hold you in such high esteem, and the work you've done off your own back and the work you've done with Bill and the way that you're still giving us your energy and your time, I think it's absolutely fantastic.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I follow my guidance. If my guidance said no, then the answer would be no. So, but it feels like every possible way, whether it's my official way, through all the stuff that I've written in our videos and everything else, or through circumstances like this, if somebody gets it that there's a better way to live life than the way we learned in our earlier years, um, then it's a great delight to be able to kind of keep opening doors in different ways for people who come at this from a different perspective.
Mm.
And it really requires it, because the fundamental premise of A Course in Miracles, which is sort of more Eastern and ancient in its underlying philosophy, is just not commonly known, especially in the Western world. And so any way we can make this not only make sense intellectually, but become useful information in changing our minds so that our world, which, and this is so very important, since all of the elements in our world are reflecting our thought processes, our state of mind. If my thoughts and my thought processes are a mess, your world is going to be a mess. And you're going to think it's caused by something or someone out there, and it isn't. So until we get some of those very fundamental, enormous premises sort of straightened out, then trying to get answers in any other way is impossible, because your foundational premise is incorrect. It's like living on a ground that has no support to it. Like walking through a swamp or something, you just kind of fall in rather than having any sturdy ground underpinnings. So I kind of think of it that way.
That's interesting because I think about a lot of the kind of traditional organized religions and the fact that people don't have the sort of mindset where they could sit around a table. And I've spoke to people about this before. If I said to you, if we were all there's five of us from different countries, and we picked up a potato, and I said, oh, I call this a potato, and someone else said, well, I call this whatever it was in their language,
Mm-hmm.
we'd be able to have that kind of free debate about it, and be interested without feeling threatened.
Exactly.
But with the foundation of a lot of organized religions, because they are shaky. There's so many people who have gone to somebody higher up than them and asked them a question, and the response has been, we don't ask that, you leave that stuff alone. That just leaves huge holes in stuff for people.
Absolutely. If you can't get a, a comprehensible, appropriate and useful answer, so that this doesn't just stay in the realm of theory. It's like we need something of an underpinning, so to speak, something that we can count on and know this is how life actually works. If I do this, I'm not going to like the result. If I do this, I will. But somebody's got to connect the dots and put all those together, or we're kind of like wandering around with blindfolds on, which doesn't make us cruel or malicious, but it makes us dreadfully uninformed. And when you walk around with a blindfold on, you can, I don't know, fall off a cliff or smash into a car or do any other number of things when, and you're not being an evil person, you're not being able to see where you're going. And it's kind of like that, don't you think?
Absolutely, because I mean, experiential understanding from A Course in Miracles, with the fact that it stands alone in as much as it offers us practice. There's something that you said which really struck a chord with me, which was, this is a spiritual practice for reprogramming our minds. And
It's not
it's
to
like,
be, it's
wow.
not to be learned. And you can understand how it would be confusing, especially to people in the Western world,
Mm,
um, to call something a course. Now, we're used to, like in college or in high school, if it's a course, you're supposed to learn whatever the material is that's being presented, and then hopefully being able to use it someplace else. Now, a lot of people take courses, like I took a chemistry course when I was in high school, but
mm.
have I ever used chemistry since then? Not in any useful way that I'm aware of. So the first thing we have to do is disabuse people of the idea that this is a batch of material that I've got to learn and wrap my head around. And then somehow I take this big batch of intellectual material and do something unknown with it. It's like, it's not a course to be learned. It's a way of living to be practiced in the moment that we're reading the words and following up, but learning to practice living a certain way and gathering intellectual information to try to make it useful later on are vastly different enterprises.
Mm.
And one will get you nowhere, and one will get, the other will get you everywhere. So it's like, understanding the difference is very important.
And how interesting that, you know, coming back to the thing with organized religion and the shaky grounds that that rests upon. In the Course of
Yes.
Miracles, it'll just go, forget this course.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Ultimately, follow your guidance, follow your intuition, follow the Holy Spirit if you wish to bring, liturgical language into play. All of it means the same thing. So there are so many important ideas, and certainly a foundational important idea that the Course presents, which is, we don't learn and grow and practice in isolation. We
Mm,
do this with our fellow man. In
mm,
other words, it's like learning uh, uh, how we relate now and how we can learn to relate with our fellow human beings. And the reason why they are, the Course is so clear about we learn in concert with others, is because we're told in no uncertain terms what we see in the behavior, the choices, the life, so to speak, of someone else is a reflection of what's going on with us.
amazing.
So until I get that straight, and the big, I've done counseling with, I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of people, I have no idea. And the issue, there's three big issues that people have, and it's going to be money, health, and relationships. And 95% of them are going to be relationships, somebody who drives you crazy, or you think is terrible, or you think is the villain, and you're the victim of their
Mm,
villainy, whatever it might be.
yeah.
And as long as that is the foundation of what we believe, peace of mind is out of the question,
Mm,
because the entire setup is incorrect.
mm,
The entire setup that says this person is the origin of my problem.
mm,
And I just have to somehow learn how to protect myself. See, the Course will say, you're going to learn what you're going to learn and find out what you're going to find out through relationships. And there's kind of no other way to do it.
yeah.
It's like, it's very clear, relationships and understanding how they operate is your way home.
Yeah.
Because my troublesome person over here is like a mirror. You can
Mhm.
call that troublesome person a mirror or a messenger.
Mm.
Whatever you want to call it, they are standing there like a mirror. Now, you've got on a lovely shade of blue shirt, I can see. So if you go stand in front of your bathroom mirror, there's no question about what's going to show up in the mirror. It's going to be a blue shirt. And nobody in their right minds thinks that the mirror somehow put that blue shirt on you or made you wear a blue shirt. In other words, the mirror does nothing but reflect. It does not make decisions for you. Now, you might decide, oh my goodness, I don't like that blue shirt. I need to put on a green one instead. In other words, it's giving you information on which you may act if you choose to, but it has no property to force you or to do anything to you. The reflection in the mirror does nothing but give you feedback.
Wow.
That's it.
Amazing.
And the people who drive us crazy are giving us incredibly accurate, precise, and relevant and important feedback, not as the villains, but as the mirror of the guilt that I'm carrying around. And one of the big messages of A Course in Miracles is we learn and grow and discover through our interactions with other people and changing our minds about both them and ourselves. Does that make sense?
Beautiful. It's making me think as well about some recent contemplations that I've had about the word relationship and the kind of universal application of this word. You know, historically, we might just go to the go-to representation of thinking a relationship between two people. But really, relationship can be with an event or a memory or an item of clothing or a person or a place. And the universal factor in all of those specifics or differences is us as the individual, as we see ourselves as an individual. So we're like the common factor in relationship. And until you reach a oneness, that is something that we would not experience directly in this life as perceived separate beings, then there's always going to be a dual aspect to everything. So relationship is like duality, isn't it? It's between two apparently separate points and how one point perceives the other point and whatnot.
And the key word is apparent.
Yes, exactly.
Rather than actual. It's like, just as, sure enough, the reflection in the mirror is going to show you your blue shirt, but nobody in their right mind is going to give equal ability of both you and the mirror to decide what you have on. In other words, this is your decision. The mirror just gives you information, but it can't make any decisions for you. And it cannot take off one shirt and put on another. It just simply gives information. And the same is true with people in our relationship.
That's so good. I love that. You know, obviously it makes me think of Ken and his classic, the world is an outward picture of an inward condition.
Absolutely.
And also one of your phrases that I liked was relationships undo the tiny mad idea.
Yes, because our maddest ideas, so to speak, are basically related to how we relate to things. Yeah. And of course, the part of the foundational premise of all of our difficulties is that this and this are unrelated to one another. It also hinges on what every single one of us are taught on the planet, so far as I can tell, is it's as if the past, with everything that's happened in it, is sort of following along behind us like this ever-growing pile, often of transgressions. In other words, you hear all the time, especially in more traditional psychotherapy and so on and so forth, it's like, I'm experiencing trauma or upset now because of what happened when I was 2.
Yeah.
Now, I'll tell you in a little bit what the relationship between what happened when I was 2 and what I believe now. But the idea that I am actively at any moment having an experience now because of something in the past is 100% in error, because there's not any past. If the past is over here, it's like it doesn't exist. It's not stored anywhere. The moment that a word or a deed is spoken, it's like poof, it vanishes. The only moment that exists is right here and right now. So cause and effect can't be linear, which is kind of the way we've grown up to believe things, like I'm the way I am now and my life is whatever it is now because of either what I did or what they did, whoever the they might be. Don't you think that's pretty universally believed?
Absolutely, and it comes back to some of the notes that I've got here where you've said our behavior never alters the truth of us. If we can realize that the past and the future don't exist, then we can correctly position the cause and effect in the present moment. If we don't feel at peace now, then the cause is here now in our thoughts.
Absolutely. And it's always going to be guilt. It's always going to be something that I believe about myself or someone else or all the above, that belief that's alive and well right now. And if I think I'm a mess about something, or if I think I'm selfish, or I think I'm stupid, or if I think I'm whatever else that all those adjectives that you can string together, that's certainly self-punishment. That's very easy to see. Not a shred of it is true, but we don't know that. We think that, and the way this works this is going to be like the kindergarten version of how this works, but we have to start wherever we are. Until we're about 3 years old, this is the time and space what's happening, not the big cosmic what's happening. Until we're about 3, we have a left brain, but it's not online yet. It's physically present, but it's not working yet. The right brain for the young of any species, whether you're a human or you're a grizzly bear or you're a cat or you're a fish or you're a whatever, the only thing that matters is surviving in your environment. And adults sort of know something about how to, but if you're a newborn baby or if you're a little tiny fish that's this big, it's like the only thing we have to work with is our intuition and our instincts, all right brain activity. So there's no thought, there's no calculation, there's no figuring out. There's just instinctively at some kind of a feeling level, this person or situation is safe to go toward. Now, those thoughts aren't being thought because I'm not thinking, but intuitively, over here is safe, oops, over here is not safe, so we retract and so on. When we get to be about 3, this is like the Cliff Notes version, and I start to build an ego. And when I build this ego, this sense of myself, I am automatically, this is not a choice, this is just something that's automatic. Then once that brain comes online, it sort of takes this stew over here of what happened. And as I build a sense of self, it's going to include erroneous information about myself because I had no way to sort out what was actually true and what isn't with no left brain functioning. So everybody, at least everybody in the world I've ever run into, so I think it's really everybody, grows up, and what gets built in are not only the things that we know we do well and we're competent at this and so on, but also gets built in things that are unloving and inaccurate about ourselves. And the top 2, probably the top two words that I hear people say when we explore like what you really in your heart of hearts believe about yourself. Now, the ego mind is going to do everything possible to not let anybody know this, so to speak, but the belief, and a belief only, that we're unworthy or undeserving, like sort of the top unlovable, undeserving, and unworthy. And these are 100% false. But these notions get sort of built in based on early stuff, no doubt stuff we bring with us, however all reincarnation and stuff like that works. But the net is that by the time I grow up, and I have a fully functioning brain, which doesn't happen until I'm about 22 or 23 years old. Everything doesn't come fully online until I'm a young adult, not a teenager. Teenagers still don't have a fully functioning brain, as you can sometimes see when you look at the decisions teenagers make. I'm being both facetious and serious. Yeah. So in any event, as a young adult, finally I have all of the hard wiring in that needs to be in. And because I had no conscious awareness of what's going on, here's the tragedy. Here's kind of the setup. I build into my sense of self things that aren't accurate in the least about my unworthiness, my undeservingness, my unlovableness, my other things, my inability to do this, and so on and so forth. And we live our lives as if this fiction is actually true about us. And so we build that sort of sense of ego self. It's kind of like my little fortress I'm going to live in. And I don't want anybody to, I'm going to try to protect myself and promote my ego, because I think that I am my ego. So, and I think that it actually has something the matter with it. So I've got to protect and promote this, which means I'm living kind of in an isolated way from other people. I may be living in the same household, but kind of psychologically, I'm living in an isolated way. And life is pretty much trying to protect and promote myself. Well, we're told by the Course and other places as well that if we want to feel happy and safe and like we're flourishing and like life is good and predictable and count onable and so on, I've got to be operating out of not how do I defend and protect myself. 2 longest lessons in the Course are about defending yourself and about how much we need not to do that. So it's like, in any event, in this only moment there is, because there's not a past and there's not a future, I always have only these 2 things to choose from. Am I going to be promoting and protecting my imaginary sense of separate self, or am I going to be focused on, I'm here to be truly helpful? Those are the only 2 things that I have to choose between. One is never going to work out to make me feel safe and beloved and everything's going to work out, and sure enough it does. And the other one is guaranteed to, and there aren't any other options. And these 2 sets of conclusions, so to speak, are a given. It's not like one or the other of them is suddenly going to give different results. Well, that makes life pretty simple. If you think there's not a past, there's not a future, there's only right now. And in this right now moment, I've only got 2 things to choose from. Wow. Well, that makes life easier, especially because life gives you instant feedback. In other words, if I decide I want to be truly helpful, your intuition and guidance is going to be right there, and things in your life are going to fall into place, and you'll find your lost keys, and you'll be instructed to call this. I mean, you'll be guided in very worldly things as well as, shall we say, more esoteric things. And you won't get a shred of guidance, although it's there. You won't be able to access it if it's all about me living in my fortress and protecting myself from you, either a person or a situation or whatever. And the thing that is amazing is all you have to do is practice it and see for yourself that it works. You don't have to take an entrance exam or anything else. You just go, yeah, wherever you are and whatever you're doing, it's like, compliment people. I talk to people in grocery stores and places all the time. If somebody looks wonderful, I'll tell them they look wonderful.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you know them or not. If that's what comes to you to sort of deliver to them, well, then deliver it to them. Make their day. Watch that smile come on their face. And it's like, so that when this gets to be your daily practice, only it becomes a way of life. It's not like you get up in the morning and go, okay, today I'm going to have to be good to people. It's just like, combing your hair. Well, maybe you don't have any hair to tell, but maybe that's not a good example.
Comb my beard.
In any event, it's like this life is not nearly as complicated as we have made it, because the foundation on which we have lived hasn't been evil, but it's been incorrect and inaccurate. So I've tried to build, on sand, so to speak. It's like the things that I try to do to make life work aren't. And of course, we have our most difficulty with relationships because we don't realize that I'm projecting onto people what I see. And one of the most astonishing things when you actually see this work in your life is you change your mind about that troublesome person. And they may never even know that you've got them penciled in as the troublesome person, but you change your mind and they mysteriously will get to be different, sometimes overnight.
We're not talking about Hank, are we?
I'm sorry?
We're not talking about Hank, are we?
Well, I've talked, he is an example.
Yeah, brilliant story.
It was, and other cases like that as well. And when over and over, you will find that when you realize, you know what, this person who's doing or saying this, have I ever done that? Have I ever employed that kind of thinking or behavior? And when you can honestly say, well, yeah, I have, but I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was moving forward or something. And you take yourself off the hook, so to speak. You realize, well, I was doing the best I could at the moment. I now realize that that's not a good idea. And that's not true. Whatever it is I'm believing about myself or somebody else isn't true, then poof, if it's gone in my mind, it cannot be reflected in somebody else, period.
Amazing.
One of the most dramatic things that ever happened in my whole life, I'm going to make this very short since I could tell you stories all day long. About the time the course came out, about 45 years ago, is also when psychologists and folks in that industry were realizing, oh, we've done a whole lot of repressing emotions, and that's very unhealthy, and it's extremely unhealthy and unhelpful. And so they advocated what no one had advocated before in any meaningful way, which is you have to honor and express your emotions. And so it's like pounding on the bed with the tennis racket and screaming and yelling. And for those of us who were born as part of the silent generation, where we were supposed to be nice and look good and never ask for anything and don't say no, and you kind of be like a little mannequin in a store window. Don't ever bother anybody with anything. So a friend and I would get together and we'd one of us would kind of be the watcher and somebody else would scream and yell and carry on. It was so hard to do. They said, and if you want to really juice it up, imagine you're pounding on somebody's head on the bed because you're pounding with your tennis racket or your baseball bat or something. Well, this was in the summertime. As it approached the fall, I thought, I think that we should, my boys were little and we still had to do Santa Claus stuff and all that. It's like, I feel my guidance says we need to go down to my family for Christmas because this is going to be the last Christmas that everybody's alive and well. That turned out to be accurate.
Right.
But in any event, we show up, and my dad was a very nice man. I mean, he was never mean or brutal or anything. He was just sort of uninterested in us. He'd been married before and had a daughter that he adored. And I don't think he wanted any more kids, but my mother did. So here we are. And so he, as I say, he had been nice, but I look at my older son and the parenting that he gives to his children. It's like, oh my God, if every child in the world were raised by somebody like his, the whole world would be a radically different place because he's a splendidly fabulous father in terms of the way he pays attention to them and how, and from the day they were born, he was paying attention to them. So this was completely not my experience, in which I've learned later, it's like somehow I set that up. So this is not making him the wrong one. That's just, kind of the way it worked. After I did my letting go, just of the pent up emotions that we carry with us and we don't even realize we're doing it, to my utter astonishment, because I didn't realize this, I'm not even sure the course was in my life yet. If so, I'm like on page 6, not like I knew what it said at that point. I walked in the door and I had a different father. And I was like 45 years old or something, or 40 years old. I mean, it's not like I was a little kid. And he was smiling. He was so glad to see me. We had long talks, the likes of which we had never had ever before. And we had a splendid time. And when I left, he gave me another couple $1,000s and said, I just want you to have this in addition to your Christmas present. I was simply stunned beyond belief that I can change my mind in Denver and I can let go of what's going on in Denver. And this guy 1,000 miles away is an entirely different person because I am projecting an entirely different something onto him. Now I've had way more than one experience like that. There is not a shred of doubt that whatever is happening within us is what we're seeing in other people. So there is no like, well, maybe this person is mirroring what's going on with me. Not a shred of doubt about what's going on with me determines what I see in other people, which is why I must learn to change my mind about me. Because if I don't, I will just run around in circles and get nowhere. And I won't be able to understand why. It makes all the difference in the world. And that's why relationships are showing us, especially the troublesome relationships, those are the ones that hang people up, are showing me what I believe, what I think, what I'm holding on to, what I feel guilty about. And since guilt is always a request for punishment, and I will always get it, if I'm carrying around guilt, but really thinking, well, I'm not guilty. This is the guilty party. They're the one that's doing X, Y, and Z, which is what we're taught. And we're taught truly the most unhelpful thing in the world is the belief that forgiveness is about pardoning this guilty party over here who is not guilty and who has nothing to do with what I'm doing to myself, except they're just standing there being an effective mirror.
Mm.
So I have to reorient my notion about what forgiveness is. It's not about pardoning someone else. It's about releasing my own guilt, which means I need to discover it, or I can discover it most deeply through my relationships. But discovering it with the help of somebody else is very different from saying they are the problem and they caused the difficulty, whatever it might be. Can you see that that's 180 degrees apart?
Mm.
What do you think?
Amazing. It's making me think of my own childhood and the fact that my dad was a very, very interesting relationship, because my dad, bless his heart, he ended up in and out of prison through my childhood, and he ended up addicted to heroin for 15 or 20 years, which was then followed by alcohol.
Mhm.
And he brought a lot of chaos to the table,
Of course.
and he caused a lot of trauma in my life, which kind of defined me for a long time, because the threat to my safety was so real and so evident and actual that obviously I had a deep sense of trepidation and anxiety. And then what I've learned through my own life, and as a musician, I've used my music as a way to cathartically express what I was going through and to turn it into something of service to other people on their behalf. You know, I've learned how to write music and lyrics for the
Yes,
people who don't have that skill, so that not only am I talking to myself in a soliloquy which shows that I've worked through a process, it also speaks to them on their behalf and says, wow, I'm not alone. I know that feeling, which is
exactly.
something that I feel very responsible for as a musician. But
Mhm.
interestingly, as I'm sure you know from your background and from your learning anyway, is like when we let go of the story, when I can tell the story of what happened to me with no emotional involvement, I'm not defined by it, I'm not teary, I'm not angry, I'm not anxious, then you would never really think in worldly terms that the answer lies in letting go of the story, letting go of the past. And then
Yeah.
what happens, which is something that crops up a lot in my conversations here, is like the thing that really blows me away and I find so beautiful is the very next thing to kick in is how can I serve? Altruistic, how can
Mhm.
I'm only here to be truly helpful. You can't get to that, like you said, when you've built this wall around yourself and you're
Of
perceiving
course, of
yourself in
course.
isolation, and you've taken a snapshot of yourself in the past that doesn't exist,
Mhm.
and you're carrying it around and holding it and going to yourself,
Exactly.
don't forget all of that, you know. If you just tear that up, or you don't even have to tear it up, you look at it,
And
look
you
at what
go,
you've
oh,
learned.
how interesting, and put it in the trash can. I mean, it's just like it becomes irrelevant in your life.
That's right. And
You know, just
also it becomes part of your qualifications as you know, your own unique path, because I can then use what I've been through and find a universal content within that to help other people. Um,
ex-
and when I sing my lyrics, people sense that these are lived and felt experiences. I'm not just reading from a sheet of how difficult it is to go through something and come out the other side with a renewed vigor or a new strength you might not have had access to were it not for the path you walked. And people
exactly.
can sense that. So it then becomes your qualification to have more of an authentic voice on behalf of others and yourself.
And did you also, in your self discovery process, realize, okay, I pencil my father in as he was a drug addict and he did whatever he did, which means he was dreadfully unhappy and uncomfortable and upset with himself. In other words, that he was tormented by his own demons and his own guilt and so on and so forth. But then, were you able to take the next step that says, okay, if I have a father who is demonstrating X, so to speak, and like whatever behavior, am I able to see that he's helping me something that I need to let go of about myself, some belief about what I am, what I've done, what's happened over here. In other words, so that it sort of completes the learning, so to speak. You can see that something about his behavior in your life can be seen as a gift to help you keep getting your own life clearer and more open and letting go of whatever you need to let go of, and so on and so forth. Do you feel like you sort of, when I say take advantage of the situation, I don't mean the way we normally use it of like taking advantage of someone else, but it's like this was learning. We all bring the people into our lives that are going to be helpful to us in our learning and growing and so on. So did you feel like, you sort of extracted from that relationship what has subsequently been helpful to you in letting go of your own self-doubt, so to someplace?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the forgiveness for him was the forgiveness for myself, and I totally
Beautiful.
see in his childhood why he looked for that compensation in the
Mhm.
world. And for him, his specific was the drug use, but there's no difference for anybody who looks for something outside themselves to fill the void inside of the love that's missing.
And what they're doing, it's not only looking for what's outside that's missing, it's we run to our addictions because we're trying to cover up the pain. In
Mm,
other words, it's like we have to be in a painful situation before addictions of any kind even become appealing. In other
mm,
words, it doesn't matter what the addiction is. It can be, what we think of, drugs, alcohol, sex, food, or something, but it can also be playing golf all day long every day. In
right,
other
right.
words, something that's going to distract me from the way I feel.
Mm,
And I've often said, if I could get the world to pay attention, a long, long, long time ago, during the height of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, a batch of us were over in Russia as like citizen diplomats, so to speak. It was like some outfit in Seattle put it together. And so 4 of us ended up being interviewed on Radio Moscow. And at that time, since it was still the Soviet Union instead of what it's sort of more or less turned into today, because it was the only radio station in the entire country. That's the only thing you could listen to. So at any given moment, there were 50 million listeners at any time during the day, an average of 50 million people. And I thought, I'd like to have a radio station where I could talk to 50 million people at once about one topic, and that is, do not make your emotional life the enemy. And that's what we've been taught to do. And it's why everybody runs to their addictions more or less
yeah.
habitually, because we associate feeling upset, all of the various ways that we can feel upset, as something that means something negative about me.
Mm,
And so I can't allow myself to experience it, and I certainly can't let anybody else know I'm experiencing it. Because if all of the if the major addictions were no longer available,
mm,
then the pain that people carry with them, that they spend their whole lives suppressing, so that they don't even know the extent to which much of what they're carrying around. But here's the problem: whether you're consciously aware of what you're carrying around, in other words, your own guilt and so on, that's causing the distress, it's still undermining the quality of your life.
mm,
And you go, so I'm carrying around with me because I've been taught, especially if I'm a man, having an emotional response to something means you're no good,
mm,
means you're a dummy, means something negative about you. And
mm,
so we hold it in, we and it results in illness, it
mm,
results in all kinds of things,
mm,
and all of it for no reason except that we erroneously have believed that if I'm upset about something, then it means something negative about me. And I mean, from the time babies are little, you'll hear somebody say, stop that crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. It's like, don't express. And it's like, so when people walk around with this admonition, don't be real, don't be authentic.
Wow.
Somehow present whatever you think is the right face to the world. Well, that does not mean that your upset is going away. It just means you have just shoved it down, often into your unconscious. And so much of our illness, so much of all kinds of stuff that goes wrong in our lives is for the very simple reason that we will not own how we feel, because we think that means owning I'm a mess, or I'm a terrible person, or there's something the matter with me. Everybody else seems to be okay. And all kinds of terribly untrue and unhelpful things. And the thing that will really help is the very thing we do not do. So we've learned, armor yourself up. Don't let yourself or anybody else know how you really feel. And then maybe you'll be safe. Can you imagine what would happen if all of the drugs, alcohol, whatever, all those were suddenly overnight taken away from the planet? It's like, but here's what happens. If you will allow yourself to feel fully whatever your distress is without associating it with a story. In other words, to put the stories on a shelf over here someplace, because it's not really ever what you think it's about. So all you're going to do is confuse yourself about, I am so upset because my wife left me, or something like that. That is not why you're upset. It may appear at the surface to be, but if you will set the stories aside, I've said many times, this is like a two-part process, so to speak. It's got a short term, what we have to do, and a long term, what we have to do. The short term is put the story of whatever it is you think who's doing what to whom over here, and focus all of your attention on feeling exactly how you feel with no commentary from your ego mind. And kind of like, rather than pushing your feelings away, bring them toward you, because here is where the healing occurs. You know, in many religions, certainly the Christian religion, people speak of the Holy Spirit and what the Holy Spirit does or doesn't do. And there's variations of that in other religions besides the Christian religion. And that has a foundation that is metaphysical and amazing and accurate, because one time, a long time ago, in 1984, because you don't ever forget anything like this, I was in a circumstance, and on what was going on supported this. It was like I had the immediate, it was in a kind of a meditational state of seeing in my mind. It's very hard to describe what that means. Seeing in my mind flames, like literal flames, the fire of the Holy Spirit. And I could see thoughts. It's as if thoughts approach this flame, they vanished. It was staggeringly important to see that the notion of the Holy Spirit healing things is not some kind of a metaphor. It's not some kind of an interesting picture that was drawn by bishops back in Nicaea 2,000 years ago or something like that. This is a literal, actual what happens, that fire of love, that reality of us, which is always present, whether we're paying any attention to it or not, has the capacity and the intention, if you want to see it that way, of healing whatever is not loving and whatever is in the way. It was simply an astonishing experience. And after that, it's like, well, you can see why it never works to push away your pain or your upset, because right here is where the healing is, and you're busy pushing it away over here to where the healing isn't. All that is a delay tactic. But whoever taught us that? Like, kind of basically nobody. I mean, I was never taught that. Were you?
No, I'm thinking of ego sort of language from Course in Miracles saying, you know, the ego wants you to seek and not find, and therefore it never wants you to look within. And what you're describing is turn that lamp to your
Absolutely,
in
because
the moment.
within that holy presence of everyone, we're not used to thinking of ourselves as a holy presence. We're thinking of ourselves as a human being in a body, and I don't do this well, I might do this okay, but you know, that sense of being a separate, isolated self is so built in that we have to kind of just reprogram ourselves to just see the entire thing differently. And you don't just do that with a snap of a finger or overnight. It's why, like, practicing whatever those lessons are, not reading and go, let me see, do I understand this? It's like, no, understanding this is not what you're asked to do. You're asked to put this into practice. Just do this today, put this into practice, put this into practice, and then watch your ability to change how you do your life, so to speak. It will continue to change as you keep following these breadcrumbs, so to speak, through the lessons. Has that been your experience as you've done the lessons?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, interestingly, from my perspective, I got the course in 1993, and the first 27 years of studying the course was very solitary. And I met 3 or 4 people who had the Course in Miracles during that time. And then during the first lockdown of 2020, I had a thought which was very alien to me, but which is very common to people of sort of subsequent generations, which was to use the internet to type in A Course in Miracles. And because that crazy idea entered my head, and I did, and it opened things up for me, I found all of the riches of that sort of sense of community and other people's perspectives and teachings. And the workbook wasn't something that I'd really engaged with. I tried it as a young man, maybe like 22 years old, and I got to sort of lesson, I guess it's in the 30s or the 40s, and it says, if you're doing this right, you'll start to see a bit of a glow around everything. And because I didn't get that result, I think I thought, oh, I'm not doing this right. And I just used the text, and I still had a lot of trauma to clear. I still had a lot of things to get rid of. And I kept going with the study and understood what I understood in a growing sort of fashion. And then when it came to do the workbook, which I haven't stopped actually with the workbook, I just kept going with it. That was, you know, that added to that initial experience as like a 21-year-old guy when I first read in A Course in Miracles, and it told me that this voice of fear isn't my true identity, and the sense of liberation and freedom that initially offered me to let go of the past and to let go of the anxiety. Because what I discovered about the anxiety during the healing process was it had become very, very, very subtle, to the point where we know with the course it'll say there's no degrees, there's no small upsets, you're either happy or you're not, you know. So the way it had presented itself to me was almost like, you know, I'd sit here now talking to you, and there'd be a sense that something could happen because stuff that had been proven to me, that the world could explode at any moment. And I would hold that in my body, because I might think that I'm sitting here very relaxed with my shoulders dropped. And then I'd realize that I'm stiff as a board. And I hadn't noticed, you know, and then I'd drop my shoulders a little bit. And then I could realize I could drop them more. And I'm probably like 10 stages away from being physically relaxed because I'm not mentally relaxed. And then actually putting the workbook into practice, that was the handle. That's, you know, my wife said to me like about a year ago, she's like, you're not the same person now. You know, she can see on a daily basis how this has given me access to the peace, which I now feel very protective about. Not
Yes,
not in an active way, but I've just got an example of like, no, 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 you know, this is the way to feel. And also
exactly.
what's come with that is a real joy of presence and simplicity. You know, most of my every day starts with me having a cup of coffee and looking at the sky after I've had a look at the workbook and done a meditation and kind of made myself available to serve today, handed myself over. Then there's
That's marvelous.
very simple kind of modus operandi, if you like. Just look at the sky, go out and just enjoy life, enjoy the fact that the traumas have all been cleared. And
Right. If this is the value of, there's not any past. This is a brand new, fresh, clean moment. And this is where I make that choice moment by moment. Am I going to have it as my goal to be truly helpful, or am I going to protect myself? Am I going to promote and protect myself? And it's like, if I can keep remembering that everything always reduces to just this binary choice,
yeah.
and one won't work and one will, and it's just, it never varies. It's like, oh, okay, well then this makes sense that I do want to be helpful, and I do want to offer my gifts to others, whatever one's get. Everybody's got gifts to offer, remembering that whatever is in my mind for someone else, like wishing them well or saying something nice to them or whatever, when that intent to be kind or helpful or uplifting to somebody else or something else is in my mind, it also accrues to me, because whatever gift I'm giving to somebody else, I'm also the recipient. Because it's in my mind for them, it's also automatically in my mind for me, because it's me thinking this with my mind, to be perfectly crazy about the whole thing. So it's like all the ways that you can, whether you're with somebody or just by yourself, that thinking of wanting the best for people in general. Maybe you're thinking about somebody in particular, or like you said, you're a musician. It's like, or whatever other areas of life call to you, so to speak. It's like being involved in those because I want other people to feel better. In other words, it's like that desire for other people to feel better and know more about themselves and honor themselves more. When those thoughts are in your mind for them, you're also the equal recipient of that. So in doing for others, you are automatically, whether you like it or not or know it or not, doing the same for you.
Wow.
It's not like we're being some kind of really better than somebody else person. It's like being helpful to others is a form of self-preservation or self-advancement or self-guaranteeing that your life is going to work out. So it's not like we ever lose anything. We do nothing but gain when we find ways to be helpful or kind or something to somebody else.
How does that add so much extra sparkle as well to the idea of do unto others how you would have done unto yourself? It just literally
Yes,
brings
it does. And it's like watching people's, I used this example a short while ago because this just happened a short while ago, but it's like watching other people light up is really fun to do. So I was at a store here in Denver, where I just can't believe I'm back in Denver, but and I had a little shopping to do, and it was one of those stores that had kind of a long thing where there's about 6 out ladies, you know, and they just call you to whichever's the next one. And so a lady, oh, maybe a middle-aged lady was checking out my stuff. And the girl next to me was not waiting on anybody because there was nobody left in line.
Okay.
She was a young African-American girl, looked like maybe she was 25 or so, a very, very dark skin, not somebody with mixed ancestry like we have so much of here in this country and everywhere. And but she was absolutely stunningly gorgeous. It's like, it's as if she was very dark but had very delicate features in some way. It was like I could hardly, so while this lady were doing my credit card, finally I said, you are absolutely beautiful. I mean, she's about 3 feet away. And the woman who's waiting on me said, yes, isn't she a gorgeous girl? And it's like, so we're both just in awe of how beautiful this girl is. And it's like, you should have seen her light up like a Christmas tree, you know, but not only does she light up like a Christmas tree, it's really fun to watch people light up like a Christmas tree. In other words, it was like, it's a delight to tell a beautiful young girl that she's a beautiful young girl. It's like, I don't know how many people tell her that. I mean, usually strange people don't tell other strange people things. I do a lot, but that's sort of not what you normally find. But it's like, it's a delight to find what's right or what's helpful or with just strange people in the grocery store, you know.
Because that gives someone permission to see themselves that way, doesn't it?
Yes.
Struggling.
Exactly. And you see, so many of us feel like we've been taught that we're not safe to be around. There's something the matter with us or something. It's like you're giving people a message that you're safe. I'm safe in your presence. So there's got to be some good stuff about you. It's like another thing that happened not long ago. I was in this grocery store that's close to me, and I was going to make some cookies for my grandchildren. I needed some baking soda, and it was an old, sort of an old store, and I could see where the baking soda was, but it was all gone except one that was way back in the back, and I'm short, so I was not able. I tried to jump up and down. I could not reach to the back of this. So my intuition said, go get the rest of your things you need and come back. And when you come back to the aisle, there'll be somebody here that can do this. So I'm walking in this side of the aisle. And as I'm walking in this aisle, from the other side comes this really tall man. So I said, you are just who I'm looking for. I was told that if I come back to this aisle, there will be a tall man who will reach this baking soda for me. And he just laughed. And of course, he just reached back and got the baking soda and so on. But it's fun to do, you know, when people are approached with appreciation. But I think it's approaching them with the kind of openness that I am absolutely safe in your presence, because that conveys something that's really very important. Because a lot of us have been taught there's something the matter with us, you know, and if we think there's something the matter with us, then we aren't necessarily going to feel like people are safe around us, and I'm not safe around them. And that's why we sort of wear our suits of armor and, you know, kind of hold in and hold back in so many ways. Don't you notice that when you're...
Yeah, because you're talking about, on a fundamental level, reinforcing this idea that we hold of saying I'm not lovable. However, somebody's learned that, as you explained earlier, from like the three years onwards as a human being. You know, once that starts to worm its way into your psyche and really gets a foothold,
Yes.
if the person hasn't started doing the work on themselves to see that that isn't the case, and then we do want to be truly helpful, we can be coming from a place, as you describe. I mean, my wife and I, she she's really, really naturally, I'll say good at it. It seems like inappropriate thing to say. She's naturally very complimentary to people.
Mhm.
And I love to watch that in shops and
Yeah.
exactly what you're describing. To say to some young girl, I love your earrings, I love your tattoos. Isn't your hair amazing? And watch
Yeah.
people light up, and
Yes.
I certainly share that quality, and I like to do that as well. And I'm quite fortunate that I'm from the north of England, although I live in the south now, and there's a very different mindset. So, for example, two people could live in the south of England and they could walk to a train station in a rural village every day for 20 years, get on the
And
train,
never
go to
never say a word to each
never
other.
say. In the north, you would like be in a queue in a post office or a store,
Mhm.
and it wouldn't even occur to you to not just break into conversation with somebody
Exactly.
that you've known them for years. And so I bring that to the south with me, and even at the weekend when I was in the supermarket, I
Mhm.
make it part of my visit and my journey is to say to the person working on the checkout, how are you? What time do you finish? Is it
Yeah.
going quickly? And kind of share the experience of, like, you want the time to go quickly. You're going to have a cup of tea when you get in. What are you going to do tonight? And
Yeah.
help them to be illuminated and
Yes.
animated. And again, I guess it's like a thing from learnt from childhood to sort of like to get back to the good feeling that's your inheritance, was kind of like to be connected and animated with this sense of like joy and eagerness for what's to come and what's happening, and just that shift of just like to to just be keen and have an appetite for the present moment and where you're going to take yourself in the present moment and what the future.
That is a great way to say it. Do you have an appetite for this present moment and for making it the highest and best that it can be? It's like
Hmm.
that's absolutely an appetite that needs to be cultivated.
Yeah.
In, in other words, it's like this, there'll never be another moment like this. There'll be other moments, but the moment that I'm in, it's like how to let ourselves express. And see, that goes back to the way a lot of us were raised, where it's like don't express
Hmm.
was the message. And it wasn't just don't express some things and you can express others. It was kind of like don't be in the way, don't be a nuisance, don't express, don't ask for anything, don't, there was a lot of don'ts, like
God, yeah.
somehow that was unattractive or whatever. So
Hmm.
uh, so
Definitely
unlearning,
part. I beg your pardon.
I said unlearning all of that
Yeah.
early, and everybody's got different kinds of unfortunate early learning. But if you're on the planet, you got something that needs to be undone. There's not going to be much question about that one way or the other. And just,
Yeah, I mean, definitely from my own experience, there was always like a sense of, needing to shrink back as a child and not take the limelight, and sort of because of
yes,
the nature of what my dad needed for what he was
yes,
trying to kind of get access to put
yes.
things straight for himself from his childhood, where, he'd been singled out from a large family, and sent away to like a boarding school. And
Mm-hmm.
he obviously, it never made sense to why out of seven children he was sent away. And that's kind of like the root issue of what put him on his path, really.
Of course, of
And,
course.
I understood that, bless his heart. And, I understood that behavior and identity is something that is really important to get to the core of, like, understanding that and taking it apart and saying, look, the core identity of this person is not their behavior is a distortion of
Absolutely.
who they
Absolutely. It's like because there's nobody on the planet except possibly my grandchildren. No, I'm kidding.
are.
who haven't had some sort of an unfortunate something in those early years, that has to be undone. Since I was a little girl during the Second World War, I remember in the spring of the first grade, I was 6 years old, all of a sudden there was a screaming and yelling out in the hallway. It was like startling, for a little kid. Well, it turns out they had just declared VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. And they were hauling everybody out to the auditorium, and of course, all the adults and possibly the older kids understood more about what's going on, but the first graders were a little like freaked out about this. So, and as part of the general uproar, there used to be big posters. Well, I grew up in a small town, a small university town, and that had the town square, and then, kind of like the commercial buildings around it and so on. And they had not only these great big posters about Uncle Sam wants you kind of thing, but they had these horrible caricatures of a Japanese soldier, kind of like a cartoonish, carrying a rifle with a great big bayonet on the end of it, kind of like, these are the guys coming after you. And shortly after that, we'd moved from another town and into a temporary place, and we had just moved into the house that I subsequently grew up in. And I remember as a little, going into the second grade, like, I've got to figure out how to stay safe, because this guy with the bayonet is going to climb in my window. And I sort of made up this story to myself. And I never felt like I could talk to adults about this. Like, somehow I wasn't sure adults were entirely safe with valuable information. So I thought, if I go to sleep, because my bed was close to the window, if I go to sleep facing the window, he can't get in. But if I go to sleep with my back to the window, then he can get in. I have no idea, how a very immature mind comes to this conclusion, but it was very worrying. Going to bed with having to manage the guy with the bayonet was like awful, and then a lot of that fear has to be undone. But it was like, I felt like there was nobody going to keep me safe but me, and I've got to manage the guy who might come in the window, so it just requires a lot of undoing once you get to be older than 7 and can begin to undo those things. But so many people have their immature brain notions of what's happening and solutions for what to do about the story of what's happening, which may have nothing to do with what's really happening. And so there's not anybody who does not have things that are misunderstood that we carry into adulthood with us, unless we've been fortunate enough to learn all of this earlier. But for most people, you've got to have your own mature brain in order to take a look at this in a helpful way.
Yeah, and interestingly, I know we benefit from, obviously, as you've expressed before, the IBM background that you had, and therefore that understanding of that model. And I know a lot of stuff that you've said that resonated with me about the fact, the difference between hardware and software, as you put it. I think I've got something here. Is like, it's not the hardware, it's the software that's in error, and therefore giving you output from your computer that's not what you're looking for. But then you said you wouldn't dream of calling a computer guilty for having some logic errors.
I remember writing that.
That was brilliant. It's so helpful, and that's obviously consequential to the fact that you have the IBM, this is the great thing about us all walking one another home, isn't it? It's like our past. We do let go of it. We do look through it. We do clear the trauma so it doesn't define us, and we're not carrying it into the present moment.
Yeah,
It's not
exactly.
limiting our appetite for the present moment. And then equally, that individuality, once we come together as a hive mind, as a collective, we've then got like a huge storehouse. So if we are looking for language to be elastic enough to present itself to a myriad of people, who, because everything's symbols, isn't it? And I could be standing with you now and I could say, isn't it a beautiful day here in by the beach? And
Yeah,
you could go, it is a beautiful day, but you could be carrying something from 50 years ago where you remember
absolutely.
your
When I nearly
brother.
drowned in the ocean or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So
Yeah.
so the symbols are universal, but they have a subtext, which is our backstory. But then
Yes.
when we come together as a collective, then you know there might be, then if all of a sudden, if it's not just you and I there and there's five of us, and then somebody says something which navigates its way around a potential trigger for you, then the shared experience of what's been expressed through language is easier
Mhm.
to get to, isn't it? Because
Yeah,
the vocabulary is bigger, because thoughts increase in strength when minds are joined.
exactly. And if we, as a kind of a final thought about in our communication with our fellow human beings, I I didn't know this many years ago, but the communications experts within us, and I don't mean the content. I'm talking about the way we communicate with others. Uh, the apparently about 7% of what we convey to somebody else is our verbal expressions, and
Wow.
then another 22 or 23%, something like that, is body language, tone of voice, facial expressions, things like that.
Wow.
And about 70% of what we convey is simply in our energy field. Now, I might be able to possibly mess around with my voice. Although I don't know how you can do that, but you can't manage your energy field in some phony way. In other words, your energy field is simply going to accurately convey what's going on with you. In other words, what our mindset is. So I think it's for a lot of people who think, oh, well, if I just say the right thing, okay, then I've fooled all these people about I'm really a mess, but I'll learn to say the right thing. It's like, oh, nobody is fooled because the whatever is so energetically in the energy field is just being broadcast indiscriminately. It reminds me of those TV sets in airports, they're just blabbering away all the time, to whoever happens to be there. And it's like our energy field is just out there doing its thing. And so we might think we can monitor what we say, but we're not going to fool anybody if our energy field is in contrary to that in some way. And I think that's a very helpful thing to remember. It's like you don't want to just change the language of your words.
Mm.
You want to change, do you genuinely want the best for this person you're talking to or for the world at large? Or are you busy trying to figure out, like, oh, I don't know about them. I've got to be safe and I've got to keep them at arm's length. Or we think that that's really private information and it's really very public information. You go, well, that's sort of a surprise to realize that we're broadcasting all the time. Don't you think that's valuable to know?
Great word to use. And in fact, 2 days ago, I was chatting to a friend of mine and I was telling him about I used to go and see this holistic therapist like many years ago, and he was a beautiful guy. He really helped me with some things at the time to get rid of and get past and reframe and etc. And I was telling my friend that after spending, let's say, an hour or so in conversation with this lovely man about thoughts and emotions and feelings, that when I used to come out of his building where he used to do his practice, there's quite a short walk to the train station. And on that walk, I can guarantee you every week, I never saw a human being for who they seemed to be in form. All I could see was how they were holding themselves physically was
Mhm.
actually, like you say, broadcasting the state of their minds. Whether
Yes.
somebody was walking along with their chest out, or whether somebody was humped down, or whether someone looked, I didn't see what clothes they had on, whether they were carrying a bag or long hair or short hair or a man, or all I could see was the energetic sort of field of that being on that journey. And I used to really enjoy that and find it quite fascinating, because
Well, bless
obviously,
your heart. That's marvelous to be that aware that you could go, I'm able to see a lot about this person that they have no idea they're broadcasting. Now,
yeah,
you may not have used those words even to yourself, but the fact that you could tell there is something different about this person and this one over here in terms of their openness or availability or something like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And we just want the best for everybody, don't we? And you just look at people and you think, you have to come back to the, like we said prior to pressing record, when we were discussing about metaphysics and stuff. You just hold the space, and in your mind that there is no separation, we're all one, this hasn't happened, and all of the stuff we know from A Course in Miracles. And it becomes an unspoken inner text or inner language that is not always appropriate to bring to the table. It's not always needed. It's just in those moments, what was I broadcasting? I floated down that road each week. I was so sort of cleansed and light, that whether they consciously or unconsciously read my energetic fields.
I'm sure that what they read, so to speak, was another way to say it is I want you to know that you're not guilty and I'm safe in your presence. In other words, because on that trip to Russia way back in 1986, and people, this is like the height of the Cold War, and people go, "You're going to Russia? Aren't you afraid of going to Russia?" It's like, no, I'm not going afraid of that. And when we flew over, we had to stay in Finland for a couple of days to kind of get used to the time change and all the rules and regulations about whatever you could or couldn't do in the Soviet Union. And I thought, I'm not paying any attention to that because I had read up a lot of, when I go to a country I've never gone to before, I read up a lot about their sort of, or I read something about both their modern and ancient history. And I thought, oh my God, what the people in this part of the world have been through is just unbelievable. And my goal is to make sure that every single Russian person that I'm dealing with, whether it's passing them on the street or interacting with them in whatever way, and there were many ways that we did end up interacting with them, my main mission is to talk to them and treat them and so on so that they know they are not guilty and I am safe in their presence so they can't be guilty. And it was one of the most miraculous trips of my entire lifetime. And I broke all the rules. They said, do not talk to anybody in uniform. So I made sure I did. So it's like, we were staying not very far from the Kremlin, and at that point they had gates across the doors. Later on they didn't, but at that point they had, across the entrance, so you couldn't just walk into the inside of it. And so I just marched myself up to these cute guys. Russian men are very handsome, and Russian women are gorgeous. You feel like you're walking around in the middle of a giant, I don't know, agency, like beauty agency or something like that. Well, these guys were just as sweet as they could be. I tried to talk to them in Russian, and they they helped me out or whatever. And they said, don't take pictures of anybody in uniform. So I saw a truck with, those with the kind of rounded tops. And there were a bunch of guys in there. They looked like they were from Central Asia someplace. And some of them were sitting on the back with their legs, hanging over the edge. So I was taking pictures of them and they were just waving and smiling. So my experience of the Russians was like so fabulous. And I'm so glad I did not pay attention to the rules, which was don't talk to any Russian people, don't have anything to do with them. Well, I in every possible way, I did not pay attention to the rules. And I'm so glad, because when the purpose is these poor people who have just been taught the stuff they have been taught, it's like it's so important for people to not only to treat them and talk to them and look at them, but to let them know they aren't guilty, they can't be guilty, because here I am, the enemy, and I'm safe in their presence.
Wow, that's making me think of forgive them, Father, they know not what they do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And everything about it was just stunningly wonderful. I've been to a lot of places, and that was one of my real all-time favorites, because I had my mission set ahead of time. No single Russian I talk to they're going to feel less guilty rather than more guilty by the time, even if it's just passing somebody on the street. And it is more fun than anything to just walk into your life with that as your goal. I don't want anybody I interact with to ever feel guilty. That has to be eliminated in all of us sooner or later.
Wow.
If we're going to live the life that is ours to live.
Such a beautiful thing to bring to the table. Amazing.
Yeah. It was really an amazing trip. So
wow. Well, I feel like I could keep you on here for the rest of my life, but I'm
well, bless your heart.
conscious
Well,
of those beautiful grandchildren, and
yes, they're just.
what is next for you? I know, obviously, you haven't lost your drive and appetite for what you do, as evident in the fact that you've just spent nearly 2 hours with me here, and
Oh yeah,
equally, you do need to capitalize on the childhoods of your grandchildren and watching your sons
yeah.
being fantastic parents. So how do you envisage yourself creating the perfect
When
balance?
I about 2 years ago, or maybe 3 years ago, when I lived in Florida and flew out here probably every 3 months, maybe 4 times a year.
Mm.
When he was about 12, I said, Jacob, I need to make some videos for you and Avery and for all kids your age. So we had a little chat, and I told him a little bit of stuff. And I said, does this make sense to you? And he said, yeah, it really does. And I said, well, I want to make a series of videos that are maybe 10 or 12 minutes long, on about maybe 10 of them, about some of the most basic ideas from the course, and not even talk about it coming from the course, just the basic ideas. So I have to live a few more years, although I am approaching the latter end of my life, because I want to create these videos for teenage kids, like maybe junior high on up. I have another book that I have to write. And when I get about sort of finished getting all settled in here, which I about am, and it's kind of this process that we've talked about some today, about the there really is I didn't mean to develop a process, but I've done this with so many hundreds of people that I find that the same kind of walking through, since it works for everybody, I simply must get it written.
Mm.
There are a couple of other things that are a little less important than that I would also like to write. So I don't feel finished yet. So I need a few more years to finish my mission, whatever that turns out to be. So no, I do have those things I want to do, not only for the kids, the teenagers, but I've got stacks of notes like this. I don't know what my boys are going to do with all that. I tried to get rid of a lot of it, but they still have a lot they're going to have to look through. Anyway, I'm not finished yet. I still have material to make available because I'm just astounded at how unavailable it is now.
Mm.
In other words, what that real message of the Course is about a way to let go of our own guilt. And we do that through our relationships. We're admonished, if you will, that we're asked to see the innocence in everything and in everyone. There's no way I can possibly legitimately believe and feel that I'm innocent as long as I've got you penciled in over here as guilty. Impossible. That's a split mind kind of, either everybody's wrong or everybody's right. In other words, that doesn't mean behavior is just fine. It's not just fine to be an axe murderer, and it's not just fine to be mean to people one way or the other, but it says the presence of every single being is still eternal and holy and loving and innocent and real and everything else. And we're not asked to pretend like the words and deeds are just fine when they aren't by anybody's standards. It's not just fine to be blowing up people over in Palestine. No, there's nothing just fine about that. But we've got to cultivate a desire to really know that the presence, the invisible part of them, the part that we recognize as the life in somebody, that part is innocent and eternal and loving and is never compromised. The words and deeds can be ghastly, and they are in many cases. And they are ghastly because that person is so guilty and terrified and unaware and everything else, not because their basic nature has been changed, but what they've learned has been so far off the truth. So I'm not asked to say, it's okay for you all to be doing whatever you're doing over there, but it's to say, I want to keep in mind that the presence of everyone remains pure and loving and deserving. And when I want to see that, to want to see the innocence that is the presence of everybody is not saying, and what your ego, mind, physical body is doing is innocent. Of course not. It's horrific in many cases. But the presence part, the part that is the real truth of us, is not in this dogfight, so to speak. And so when we really, really do want to see the innocence in a whole spectrum of people, not just the ones that we think are fine, like your family members, but the people whose behavior can be off the charts because it's so terrible. It's like anybody's behavior that is terrible is because they are terrified, they are guilty, they don't know who they are. It's like walking around in life with a sack over your head. You don't know who you are, what you're doing it for. And so our behavior can be astonishingly terrible, terrifically terrible, but the life presence isn't. The life presence remains love itself. It remains the eternal, what we all are. And we're just asked to acknowledge that, not necessarily to them. You're not going to go up to the axe murderer and say, I just want to make sure you know that the reality of you is innocent. I mean, that person's going to be in jail, is going to be taken care of at the time and space level. But for our well-being, as well as the well-being for the planet in general, I want to keep in mind that the presence, the life of everybody remains pure and loving and good. Behavior, hideous in cases, but the life, not in the dogfight. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it comes back to the journey I said to you about with my dad, of being able to separate identity from behavior.
Absolutely. Perfect way to say it. The identity is not involved. It can't be ruined. There is no way that you can ruin or diminish love itself, the actual life of all that is. You could not see it, and you can misunderstand things and all kinds of stuff like that, but you can't alter the truth about yourself.
Amazing. I tell you what, I was just thinking about this conversation is, obviously we've come together to talk about A Course in Miracles, but we have done that without reading from the book, without talking about the lessons. We've talked about the experiential practice of A Course in Miracles. And really, as you rightly articulated earlier, this is the deal. It's like, we don't want to go and sit in a room somewhere and close the door and the curtains and recite to ourselves that we've memorized paragraph 13 from chapter.
Exactly.
We have to go out there and we have to put it into practice. So how interesting that, we've spent a couple of hours really talking about A Course in Miracles
in practice.
Yeah, without mentioning it, really. It could have been easy for me to say, right, tell us all the stories about Bill and loads of stuff.
You should read my book about Bill if you want to know about Bill. He was just stunningly amazing human being.
Yeah.
Bill was an example of what happens when your childhood is hideous and you end up with a glorious ending.
Amazing.
Like his life is the most amazing life example of following your intuition, not knowing where this is going to lead or where that's going to lead, but following intuition. And I'll tell you, Bill was a treasure on this planet. What an amazing, fun human being. He had a hilarious sense of humor. And so did Hugh Prather. Are you familiar with Hugh Prather? He's another author. Oh, he wrote fabulous things. Well, Hugh was kind of part of our group of friends, and Bill and Hugh were both absolutely, even by themselves, could be the funniest people on the planet. But when they were under the same roof together, it was simply side-splittingly funny. One year, Bill flew out to Denver, and my husband and I and another couple drove down to Santa Fe, where Hugh and Gail lived at the time, and we spent a long. Bill was a huge opera fan, and the Santa Fe Opera is second only to the Metropolitan Opera in New York, so far as expertise and brilliance at what they present. So we went down to take Bill to the opera and to spend a long weekend with Hugh and Gail, and we laughed until we cried the entire weekend, except possibly when we were at the opera, because both of them could be, there's no way I can describe how funny both of them were. And when they were together, they were sort of playing off of one another. It was like, it was just hilarious beyond description. It was like, so there's huge humor, so to speak, throughout the early days of all the people with the early sort of course family, so to speak. And so that practicing the course was not a solemn duty, so to speak. There was great hilarity involved, and Bill just had an instant sense of humor. And his dear friends, the Lucketts, who were so important to his life in the last couple of years when he lived down in the southern part of California instead of up in San Francisco. It was like, since I knew all those people and therefore had a chance to interview all of them, it was like, you just got the same story from everybody about what Bill was like, not only how amazing and just sort of like a holy person, people just got healed by being around him, so to speak, but also being the funniest person on the planet. And most people would have no idea about that. You would never guess that one of the people who wrote the course was a comic, among other things. And he was absolutely amazingly funny.
I find loads of humor in A Course in Miracles all the time. Things that I read in there, which just I can't help but just laugh because, whether it's like I'll often mention to people like the juxtaposition of, say, like when you read that tiny little bit that says you're not special.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say to people, imagine the spectrum of emotion within which you could say to someone, you're not special, and somewhere in that spectrum is a point of utter kindness and love where someone's looking you right in the eyes and saying, you're not special.
Right. Yeah.
And
Are amazing, but not special. Yeah, right offhand. But no, Bill was, I feel like, first of all, it was just an assignment. I knew that I had to write his biography. It was too amazing a story, and there was too many signs and too much synchronous stuff going on. It was like being hit over the head, like write this book. And I feel like the course becomes a more meaningful work when you know the backstory about how it got here in the first place.
Mm.
And about the people who brought it here, and how, because it's not like this was a piece of cake. Bill and Helen had a terrible time getting along, and yet they knew they had to be together to do this. She worked for him. He was her boss. Mm. And so they were thrown together by fate and so on and so forth. But all the things that happened, all the things that they explored, some of the very funny things that happened, and so on and so forth. And the fact that when they were working on the course, when she was getting her, getting her messages and dictating to him and so on and so forth, it's like they were in total harmony. In other words, it's like all of the stuff was gone, but then when they were working together with their work, they often could not agree about what day it was, much less anything else. So it's a nearly unbelievable story about how it came to be. How is it possible that these two people could have somehow gotten together to write this book? But they did, and did a masterful job of it.
Wow. Well, I looked for an audio book. Is there not an audio book of it?
Yeah, there is. I've got an audio book of it on my, I have
the website.
On my website.
Okay.
carolhowe.com. So there's an audio book of Never Forget to Laugh.
Right.
And I also have made an audio book of the text of the course.
Yes. Yeah.
Which took forever to do. 622 pages long.
Jeepers.
Stop and adding and taking stuff out and putting things in. The phone rings and you got to take that. I forget to turn it off and stuff like that. So yes, both of those audio books are available. I thought I can't leave the planet until these are audio books. Because
I think the issue for me was I was looking on my platforms like, say, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google, and I kept typing in, Never Forget to Laugh, Carol Howe, build it, and not.
It's on a lot of platforms, but Audible will not take an audio book unless it has a physical book that's identical to it and it's got the same cover and everything else.
Okay.
Which means on my very long to-do list, the girl who worked for me and researches stuff like this, talked to them and we said, but this is about A Course in Miracles, and there is A Course in Miracles. It's like, yes, but that's the Foundation for Inner Peace course, And my cover isn't the same as that cover, which I would never do because it's a copyright thing. So we've got a different kind of cover, but somehow I have to find time to, and it doesn't even have to be very long. I can write a 50-page book of some kind that we can put the same cover on, but it's just my to-do list is about this long. So I hope I get it done. But otherwise, that's the only thing that's keeping it from being on Audible. They're just fine with the ebook. It's just that I've got to have a written book that matches it.
Okay. Well, I think I'll go onto the website and I'll fill the next few days with listening to you read the Never Forget to Laugh book, because the stories that I've picked up over the years are just fascinating, whether it's the messages in a car number plate, or Judy in the plaid skirt, or the fact that you felt like Bill was the only person in your life who you knew straight away, you know, that sense of like, you know, and I know that exactly what you've expressed from people is like, this isn't starting right now here in this moment, you know, this history between us is beyond this. And the humor in when you realized that the project that you two of you were going to do together didn't necessarily involve Bill still being here with us.
Yes, wasn't that amazing? I mean, Bill was very clear. It's like, I just feel like we've got a project to do together, but I just don't know what it is, because he's very much an introvert and didn't like talking to people. I mean, that wasn't his favorite thing to do, and I'm at the opposite end of the spectrum. But the there was and you can cut all this out of whatever you're going to put on your website, but way back in about 1984 or something like that, Jerry and Bill and Ken Wapnick and I did an all-day workshop for the University of California at San Diego, and it was one of the weirdest things I've ever done. So the night before, I said, I think maybe this is in Never Forget to Laugh. I'm not sure. I said, are we going to like plan what we're going to do? Because I'd done stuff with Jerry and I'd done stuff with Bill, but not at the same time. And I'd also had not done anything with Ken Wapnick. So usually if I'm going to do an all-day workshop, I kind of give some thought to like, what's the theme, what's going to happen. And so I said, Jerry, are we going to make a plan? He said, yeah, there's a plan. I said, thank goodness, what is it? And he said, the plan is I'm going first, and then Ken, and then you, and then Bill. I said, that's the plan? He said, yep, that's the plan. Like, I hardly slept all night long. It's like, and there was a big bunch of people there. This was a big crowded auditorium. It's like, and I have no problem with public speaking, but I usually try to know what I'm going to speak about rather than just showing up with no clue whatsoever. And at one point, it turned out to be a big success, kind of despite the fact that there was nothing planned about this. And at some point, some guy asked a question about something or another, whatever it was. And Ken pops up and he said, we'll answer that question when we get to that topic. And Jerry hops up and he said, no, we won't. We will answer any question whenever anybody asks it. And Bill hops up and he says in his beautiful voice, I think it's time for us to do a lesson. It had to be one of the most unnerving and also hilarious things I've ever had anything to do with in terms of trying to present this material. But somehow Jerry was right. Somehow it did all work out at the end of the day. But this guy wanting to know, and Ken said, we'll talk about that later, Jerry. We'll talk about it now. And Bill, we're going to do a lesson now. I wish it was bad. Some of those moments were not captured.
Why am I thinking of the Three Stooges when you tell me that?
Pardon me?
Why am I thinking of the Three Stooges when you tell me that?
Yes, it's about like that. It was really very, very, very exhausting, but a very funny day. Watching the different modality of these three guys was just a process in itself, because they're all marvelous, of course, and very different in their way of presenting things. Bill didn't like to do it at all. He's such a private person that he would only do this if some of us were with him. He would never, ever agree to just make a presentation by himself. He hated that. In fact, that's where the little prayer that says, I'm here only to be truly helpful, that's in the early part of the text, that's the only part that was not, that did not come from dictation. That came from Bill had to do a presentation to some group that he seriously did not want to present to, because he was not a public person. He was a very kind of a private introvert type person. And he got this little message prayer right before having to kind of comfort him about having to make this speech that he didn't want to make. Wow. And they thought it was so helpful that they decided to insert it into the course, in that early chapter. But it's the only thing that's in the course that was not part of the flow of dictation.
Wow. And how interesting that the foundation, I did a webinar with the foundation in July, and I've done a Miracle Voices episode, and both of those start, as matter of course, as I'm sure you know, with the truly helpful prayer. It's like everything they do starts with
exactly. And it's very often quoted and so on. So even though it was not part of dictation, it clearly came from that same kind of intuitive place in him that was part of the intuitive collective where the course came from.
Well, I hope he got Helen to type that out for him.
So
role reversal.
It did get inserted, but that's the only thing that was not part of the whole flow of dictation. But as complicated as Helen was, and as much as they had their disagreements about things, there was obviously some part of her that was really tuned in some way. When Bill moved to California, he agreed, and Helen was furious that Judy and Bob and Bill were all going to move to California and leave her behind. Well, she could have gone, but of course she was married to a guy who owned a bookstore, and they were really wedded to New York. They couldn't just pick up on a whim and move out there. But she was really mad at them for like leaving her behind, so to speak. And so Bill and Helen had an agreement that every single day until the day she died, he called her.
Yeah, I've heard you talk.
Even if it was a 5-minute chat, he called her at noon her time, 9:00 California time. And one time when he was visiting me in our family in Denver, there were half a dozen of kind of my best friends who got to know him well. So it was kind of like his little Denver family. And he called her during the time they were over in my house. And so he said, okay, Helen, I'm going to pass the phone around and everybody can say hello to you, which she probably thought was a terrible idea, but I don't know what her response was because I didn't hear it. So it went around to 2 or 3 people. And then one fellow who was a very dear friend of, there were 2 people. The first time Bill came, I had a big party in my backyard so that all the course people I knew could meet Bill. I asked if he would agree to that, since he normally didn't like big crowds of people, but he said yes, he would. But I only did it once. But there were 2 people who were very dear friends of mine, both deceased at this point. And every time he came back to visit, I always arranged that those 2, not at the same time, but that he would be able to spend time with those 2. So those 2 guys and another 2 or 3 or 4 people were there in a little circle. So after he got through, he said, okay, pass the phone around and everybody talked to Helen. Well, I don't know what Helen said on the other end, but it got around to Jason, and you could watch his face. It was like, and he held on to the phone longer than anybody else, and it continued to be passed around. So once they hung up and Helen wasn't saying hello to everybody, he said, I can't believe what I heard. He said, all of a sudden, out of Helen's voice, I could hear like I don't know if he said choirs of angels, but he said it was like this beautiful, like musical sound that was in a cathedral or something. I mean, he was just lost for words over this amazing sound that was suddenly coming out of Helen's voice. And Bill said, "Oh, she just does that for people sometimes." I mean, Jason is blown away by what he's just heard. And Bill goes, "Oh, she does that for people sometimes." She said, "It's like this holy sound in a cathedral." I was having a terrible time trying to find the right words to describe how amazing the sound of her voice was when she was being who she really was, which I guess didn't often happen.
No, bless
But
her.
it was a very astonishing experience for him, and it went on for a few minutes. He said it was like listening to heavenly choirs, was the sound that was coming from out of her. So you go, okay, well, despite the difficulty of her personality, she obviously was carrying some really amazing gift, not only as it came out in the course, but in little moments like that, when that sort of holiness manifested itself in other ways.
Yeah, because I find that really humorous. Again, obviously you've made it really clear just how much humor is like evident in the entire construct of how the course came about. But I, say to people sometimes, imagine if A Course in Miracles had been channeled or received as an inner dictation by someone who called herself like Mother of the Forest and wore like a daisy chain princess crown and beads and
Exactly.
tie dye. We'd all be like, oh God, here we go, A Course in Miracles, what have you come up with? But the fact that it came in the way that it did, in the place, in the university, it's brilliant. And we're so
Exactly.
lucky to be alive and to have you to be here with us to tell these stories firsthand, because 100 years from now, 50 years from now, we know what happens with these systems.
That is exactly why I did this, because there is some nonsense and some ridiculous stuff about Bill and whatnot on the internet.
Mm,
Not a shred of it is true,
mm,
because, fate kind of arranged apparently that I was going to do this, because about 8 years before I wrote this book,
mhm.
a guy called who somehow, that was back in the days of cassette tapes, and
Ooh,
somebody up there had given him, I don't know how they arrived in New York. Somebody gave him to somebody who gave him to somebody else who had something I had done. And he was moving from New York down to Florida. And whoever this person was gave him my name to call. I don't remember how this person, what the deal was as to how they even knew where to find me, but somebody did. And somewhere in the conversation, he said, I used to work with, he was a course student, or at least it was I don't know, he was a student, but he was familiar with it. And he said, "Oh, by the way, I used to work with Bill in the CIA when we were, they were all kids in their 20s, in
mm.
their 20s." And it was like, that seemed amazing. Well, when the years passed and it turned out that I was going to write this book, under normal circumstances, I would have no way of being able to write about those early years,
Right.
except this guy had been planted literally a few years earlier, and he gave me access to the other people who had been in the office. So I was able to zero in on what happened. It just was formed as a little dinky organization at the end of the Second World War. So I got to talk to 3 or 4 or 5 people that literally worked with Bill. The likelihood of that happening is extremely remote, unless it's meant to be that somebody who had that early experience and early information about him just fell in my lap. I noticed it didn't fall in anybody else's lap. So it was just there to be able to include as a very important part of his life journey, because he didn't have a plan. He just kind of followed his intuition from one place to the other. And so on and so forth. But it was
And
like,
despite the tiny mad idea, he never forgot to laugh. And I love the way you didn't have the title, did you, till you got right to the end.
to the end. And I always had the feeling that, and psychic people said, oh, I had one friend who was talented. He said, there's Bill standing behind your left shoulder. He's always behind your left shoulder with that blue sweater on. Well, now I'm not psychic, so I never could see Bill on my left shoulder, but the psychic people could. But I had a sense all the way through writing this that Bill was, through license plates and all kinds of other stuff. It's like Bill's present as part of this. I knew that right from the beginning, that I don't know how, but he was influencing it in some way. And a specific way was dropping this guy in my life that could tell me about the early CIA days that I would never have had any other way of even knowing existed. Well, I knew he worked for the CIA, but I would have had no other entry points. But there were messages all along the way that made it very, very clear. It's like, yep, I'm here overseeing things.
Guidance telegrams, I think, is your phrase.
Exactly. Yeah, I have good guidance, my intuition I can count on, and it always feels directional. That's why I call them my guidance telegrams. They feel like they come from the left-hand side and kind of follow across my awareness. They don't just kind of, guidance doesn't just float around out here someplace. It feels directional and specific and sort of right in front of my nose, kind of thing, like do this or call this person or here's where you want to go to find that.
Well, I am so grateful that your guidance telegram was a yes when you received my request, because what a beautiful time and what a beautiful conversation. And I know I speak for loads of us who love you and adore you and appreciate everything that you've done for us. And, with such heartfelt, genuine intent to conserve and preserve the truth of these people and what happened, and yeah, I'm just so grateful.
And I feel that it's very important, because Bill's gone, Judy's gone, Ken is gone, and I'm practically everybody else from that sort of early first family is gone. And Whitson, who was a prince of a man, when Judy and Bob were no longer together and she met Whit, it's like he was an elegant human being and so dedicated to everything related to the course. And it was a marvelous experience to have a chance to know everybody and kind of know all the backstory of everything of what happened. And I thought it just can't not be preserved, because there are not many of us left. In fact, John Mundy, who teaches in New York and knew Helen, but he was not part of the San Francisco gang out here. But basically, just about everybody else is gone. Ken's gone, Bill's gone, Judy's gone, Whit's gone. And so not much left. Bob Scutch is still around. I think he's just had his 99th birthday, but he hasn't done any writing or any speaking or any being present for decades now. So since he wrote his book a long time ago. So there's, as I say, John Mundy is still teaching. Roger Walsh, of the kind of gang of us in San Francisco, I flew back and forth between Denver. Roger Walsh is still alive. But he's not teaching or anything anymore. And John Mundy is still alive and teaching, but he was not part of that first group. And me, and that's it, so far as anybody who can know firsthand what the early days were like. Hugh's gone as well. And Gail is still alive, so far as I know, but she was never really involved in, I mean, she was a student of the course, but she was never involved really with anything that happened at the beginning. A very funny girl.
Dr. Bob as well.
Pardon me?
Dr. Bob as well. Bob Rosenthal?
Oh, he died a while
Yeah.
back. Bob was only, Bob lived in New York and was not really, didn't have anything to do with the original stuff that happened when the course was first coming out. He and Tammy, Judy's daughter, were summoned, so to speak, once Whit died, because Judy and Whit ran the foundation. When he passed away, and there was no way, I mean, she was already overloaded. So at that point, Tammy and Bob were brought out to kind of run the organization. And Whit was very skillful at the part that he did, so to speak, which was oversee all the translate. There are so many translations of the course that at the last I heard, 98% of the population on the earth has access to a translation in their language. Wow. I don't know who the other 2% are that don't have it, but it's been translated into, 35 or 36 languages or something like that. And Whit oversaw all of that, as well as helping to run what you should do, and everybody should do this. If you go to the Foundation for Inner Peace website, someplace on there is a link to Whit's obituary. And when you read his obituary, starting out with graduating from West Point, and you go through all of the jobs he had, all of the stuff he did, all the stuff he wrote, ending up with being charged by Governor Brown of the state of California to design and oversee the earthquake emergency planning, which is sort of not what he was hired to do. But I mean, that's not what his schooling taught him to do. But it was like, you look through that and you think, how is it humanly possible that one person could have had all of those jobs? All of these are big jobs. They aren't menial tasks. You go start up here, you go down here, and he wrote a few books in the midst of everything. You go, this looks humanly impossible. It was, I do not have the right adjective to describe the elegance and the presence of this man.
Oh, beautiful.
He was so open and so inviting and so automatically presumed the highest and best in people that it brought out the highest and best in people. He was almost like a magician. And it's not anything he did deliberately. It was his wholesale and wholehearted acceptance and kindness toward everybody he ever met.
Wow.
So reading his obituary, you will go, well, this is impossible. How could everybody do all these things in one lifetime? He did. So yes, the what you might call the first chapter of the course beginning and so on is soon the entire first chapter will be history, because everybody will be gone. That's why I have to keep writing.
Yes, you do. Thank you so much for your time today. It's really been an absolute honor. And I look forward to watching this back myself a number of times and just savoring
and edit out all the stuff that's not relevant to your particular mission. And because I'm not sure precisely what you wanted to cover, but hopefully somewhere in there is everything you wanted to cover.
I won't be changing anything.
Okay. Well, you have a wonderful rest of your day, and best wishes in all of your missions as your own guidance directs you, and you can count on it. Like life only works when you follow your guidance, no matter how surprising. Like move back to Denver. It's like back to Denver. So anyway, it was the perfect thing to do. And whether it's on small things or large things, your guidance knows This is where your next learning, your next letting go, your next who you need to meet and what you have to do. And it doesn't matter that you don't know what that is. You just trust that your life knows.
Beautiful.
All right.
Thank you so much for the blessing, and thank you so much for your time. And be well and enjoy, and keep doing what you're doing, and keep being you.
I will. I've got to get a couple more books written, and that's right on my agenda. So you have a wonderful rest of your day or
Thank
night,
you.
as the case may be.
Yeah.
All right, dear.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Bye.
Bye-bye.